There are a lot of SNES games that have aged beautifully. You could even argue that these games have, in general, aged a lot better than those in the following generation on the PS1 and N64. So let's highlight just some of the games from the library that have stood the test of time, while also trying not to just make this look like a best SNES games list. We've already got one of those. If you have any games to recommend for a follow-up video, leave them in the comments below and they could be featured. I'm Jimmy for Cultured Vultures, my knees are currently screaming, and these SNES games aged beautifully. Shadowrun is a long dormant IP in the video game realm that we don't think people talk about nearly enough. While well known and well liked among die-hard SNES fans, Shadowrun really should come up more frequently in conversations about the best SNES games. A cyberpunk fantasy action RPG isn't exactly a major genre on the Super Nintendo for one, and the combination of the gameplay with some rich, compelling cyberpunk aesthetics makes for something we wish the console saw a bit more of. A skill-based RPG with action-focused combat, Shadowrun has chunky depth to its leveling and spell learning, with fast-paced fighting sequences that keep the game from getting monotonous. It's an excellent choice for action RPG fans and turn-based players alike, with the game itself being based on a pen and paper role-playing game. There's a twisted noir quality to Shadowrun, beginning from the moment you wake up and escape from your own slab at the morgue. The world of Shadowrun is one in which elves and orcs exist alongside a time and place that might remind you of Blade Runner, or maybe that Will Smith movie? Anyone remember that? It's a mix of ideas that hold up extremely well today, unlike that Will Smith movie, and we only wish the promised sequel at the end of the first game had materialised, though Shadowrun Returns did end up being a good old time. Shadowrun in video game form was last seen with Shadowrun Hong Kong, a solid but somewhat already forgotten tactical RPG. Shame. Yeah, we're pretty fond of Chrono Trigger around these parts, so it shouldn't be too surprising to see it make an appearance here. It's no F-Zero, because nothing is, but it is pretty good. Released by Square in 1995 as one of their last games for the Super Nintendo, the game was rightly celebrated for some of the best graphics on the SNES, and they still look beautiful today. Seriously, you just don't need an emulator for this thing. Dust off the SNES, blow in the cart and convince yourself it actually does do something, and get thoroughly unga-bungered. The distinct, varied pixelated characters and absolutely stunning town maps and backgrounds still pull in players nearly 30 years later. The score by Yasunori Mitsuda and Nobuo Uematsu is also one of the best for the console, which is saying a lot as Square alone released a number of exceptional JRPGs with banger soundtracks on the console. Chrono Trigger also ages well in the gameplay department, using relatively standard but still slick RPG mechanics and Square's famous active time battle system to make a game that's a breeze to pick up and play. It's a perfect RPG in every way, and it's one people continue to play and love in droves. I need to finish my recent playthrough on Steam Deck, but I am really struggling for time. I don't know if you know this, you might have heard some rumours. Super Mario World is great, but the 1995 sequel, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, deserves just as much love. The game would take Mario's flagship SNES series in a very different direction, both in terms of visuals and gameplay, creating something as unique as it is timeless. Yoshi's Island may, at times be the best advert for contraception there is. But that's a small price to pay for a platformer that's as much fun to play now as it was when the game was first released on the SNES in 1995, especially if your hearing has gone a bit in those years. Decades on, the bright, cartoonish storybook graphics are a blast of pure pastel brilliance. Yoshi's Island remains a challenging, surprisingly complex 16-bit platformer that even its most experienced players can get lost in. Exploration is key in Yoshi's Island, and the breathtaking world that it all takes place in makes that easy. There's really nothing else like it. Well, Except for Go-Go Beckham Adventure on Soccer Island on the Game Boy Advance, apparently. Would you guys like a video on rip-offs of Nintendo games? I mean, Garfield would dominate, but yeah, let us know down below. While it did good sales in Japan, where it was known as Mother 2, and at least respectable sales for a mid-90s RPG in the West, the 1995 release Earthbound was quickly forgotten by all but a small cult following. You gotta remember, this was a time when this was the future of gaming for some people. 2D games were beginning to be looked at as a little uncool, and then Bubsy 3D came out a year later and blew everyone's minds. Maybe that Mario game as well did something? I don't know. That following for Earthbound has grown exponentially over the years, owing to Earthbound characters and world appearing in various Super Smash Bros. Games, as well as Earthbound getting releases for the SNES Classic and the Wii Virtual Shop. And also, like, credit card companies, we guess? It's available to play today on the Switch's virtual SNES, and you owe it to yourself to see why Earthbound is one of the best aged games on the Super Nintendo. A charming story with RPG mechanics and character-filled graphics, Earthbound mixes vintage Americana with a very bizarre, surprisingly dark plot concerning a group of kids who must destroy an alien traveller known as Gigas. There's also a brilliant sense of humour in everything from item descriptions to the most casual NPC dialogue, or even just the battle screen. These qualities have inspired numerous games over the years, but most notably in Undertale. Earthbound has its little frustrations, particularly when it comes to inventory management, but even after all these years, it's aged to close to perfection. Just like that meme, where we all harassed Reggie constantly for like a decade to release Mother 3. Right guys? Yeah? Among the many beat-em-ups that have been released under the TMNT banner over the years, Turtles in Time might be the best release to consoles over the years. Second perhaps only to the recent Shredder's Revenge, the 25 plus year time span between those games should tell you how brilliantly this banger holds up. TMNT 4 Turtles in Time has the basic save April, save the world premise, get the hell away from me Zachary Quinto, but with the added spark of Shredder sending the Turtles into the past, where nothing bad has ever happened because the old times were better. Your travels take you to the Wild West, prehistoric times, and even the future, fighting a wide assortment of enemies and bosses along the way. It's pretty straightforward stuff on paper, except that when you combine that simple pleasure of knocking mutant warthogs around with a responsive, perfect control scheme, you have an enduring classic. Turtles in Time also looked remarkable in arcades, with the SNES port being shockingly close to perfect. It's still a game that can visually grab your attention, and the sheer joy of bashing monsters and robots alongside your friends means you don't have to care a single bit about the turtles to love this game. I can't tell my Raziel from my D'Angelo, whatever they're called, and I can still mess with Turtles in Time. And dude just sat the fuck up somewhere. Selling well over 1 million copies, Kirby Superstar was a surprising lifeline for the SNES so late in its lifespan. With the Nintendo 64 release just 3 months later, a graphically stunning collection of smaller Kirby games that had the best controls and special abilities of the entire series up to that point was a great way to prove Nintendo's arguable best console still had a lot to offer. Pick up the game today and you'll find that most of your Kirby Superstar nostalgia holds up nicely as well. Some of these smaller minigames do get pretty tiring pretty fast, yeah, but the core platformers featured here provide some of the best Kirby gameplay of the era. Spring Breeze offers a delightful, albeit abridged remake of Kirby's 1992 Game Boy debut, while modes like the Great Cave Offensive put Kirby in a game that could be described as a casual Metroidvania. Revenge of Meta Knight offers a relatively spicier challenge, and there's a ton of 2-player fun to be found too. Kirby hasn't deviated too terribly far from the formula you'll find in Kirby Superstar. The dude eating cars does still feel pretty on brand. If you're a Kirby fan, that's obviously not a bad thing, and it makes Superstar pretty damn timeless. We're going to go with the first game in the Mega Man X series, released at the height of the SNES's power in 1993, but we think you can pretty much put any Mega Man in here. Alright, maybe not Mega Man Soccer, which becomes funnier when you take the Mega out of its name. Mega Man X reimagined the NES's beloved Blue Bomber as a weary soldier in a dark future, but didn't take the character too far away from what made these Capcom platformers some of the best of their kind in the history of the medium. We wish we could say the same for Bomberman though. Mega Man X was a game clearly designed from the ground up to take advantage of the power of the Super Nintendo. From the moment the game drops us into the city, suddenly rushing to fight robot enemies and meet an unknown, potentially unstoppable force, Mega Man X presents a more intense Mega Man experience than anything before. Like the best Mega Man games, the first X release features sharp character designs that inspire legions of indie games today, an incredible soundtrack, and controls that almost anyone can pick up in a few minutes. But it's the challenge of Mega Man X that also makes this game an essential play for anyone new to what the Super Nintendo brought to the table. Just remember to use Electric Spark on the final boss and show him who the real Sigma is. While very similar in certain regards, the Capcom-developed Disney's Aladdin for the SNES is ultimately a completely different game from the one developed by Virgin and Sega for the Genesis. Is it better? Well, that's ultimately up to you, but if you're a fan of the amazing Disney platforms Capcom developed for both the NES and SNES, this version of Disney's Aladdin will have a lot to offer. Aladdin on the Super Nintendo looks as sharp as ever, and while the gameplay itself may not be quite as varied as its Genesis counterpart, there's also something ageless about Capcom and really damn good platforming games. Especially when they look and sound like one of the best examples of what this hardware could do in the early 90s, and why people are still flocking to that hardware years later. The only bad thing you can really say about Disney's Aladdin is that it's much too short. Grab it on the Disney Classic Games collection and use it as a palate cleanser when The Lion King has you nearly blacking out from frustration. Developers don't hate the kids like they used to, do they? They just don't. Fun fact, Shinji Mikami, he of Resident Evil, Dino Crisis God Hand and Vanquish fame, give Vanquish its flowers people, designed this game early on in his career, but actually seems to prefer the Genesis game. I mean, yeah, there's not really a whole lot of new stuff you can say about one of the most influential games of all time that still really does hold up. Super Metroid has done more than arguably any other game, apart from maybe the other bit in the Metroidvania name, to create the core concepts that would form the basis of some of the greatest indie games ever made. Without Super Metroid, there's probably no Hollow Knight and Dead Cells. But as for the game itself, from a gameplay and overall presentation standpoint, yeah, it stands up. With new additions like an auto map and being able to fire in every direction, you're still left with one of the very best action platformers ever made that has aged a lot more gracefully than its NES predecessor. Surpassing Super Metroid is a difficult task, but so many indie games on Steam owe their whole existence to Yoshio Sakamoto and Samus Aran. You could play the 6 Degrees of Separation from basically any game on any storefront and it would probably still come back to Super Metroid. Even now, years and years later, Super Metroid sets a bar for 16-bit platforming that few have ever reached, and that's not going to change anytime soon. While it could be said that both Contra as a franchise and Konami as a developer have both seen better days, with both kind of merely shells of their former best selves, please be good Metal Gear Solid Delta, we at least have undisputed classics like Contra 3 The Alien Wars to keep us company. Perhaps the best game in its franchise, The Alien Wars was another early SNES release that was clearly designed to show off just how serious Nintendo was about being competitive in the next console generation. It's an aggressive, deliriously difficult run and gun shooter that still has the teeth to take even the best players to the limit of their mental health. Make no mistake about it, on any setting, Contra 3 The Alien Wars is the kind of game that's as fun to play as it is John-maddeningly frustrating. Unless you're some sort of freak of nature, you can expect to die in this game many times. Pressure makes diamonds, and you can't spell diamond without die. Don't look that up. You're gonna get killed often in Contra 3 The Alien Wars, but as you might expect from a game that could be a massive hit with players in any decade, you're gonna come back for more because while you might have aged, the classics never truly do. And that was our video looking at some SNES games that have stood the test of time. What do you think has aged pretty well on the SNES as well? Do be sure to let me know down in the comments below, because then we can do another video and harvest your data for our entertainment. No, it'll just be fun. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. Thank you for watching, and bye. Wait, that's not it. That'll do. Bye!